So welcome back to the 5th part of this series. This is the free series on YouTube, and I do have more tutorials that are on my Patreon. You can find me on patreon.com/CorinneStatesArt, all one word, where I do dogs and we create cats and do fur tutorials and noses and ears and horses. So anyway, so we are continuing lightening up his mane, and we're just going to keep working all these little pieces out with the same techniques that you have been using from tutorial 1, tutorial 4, and now we're continuing. I'm not sure how many videos this will be. I'm guessing about 6 or 7. So we are on 5, and we're just continuing to blend out his mane, make the darker areas darker. I want to make sure that it looks like his hair is layered and it's just all over the place and lovely. So let's continue to darken these areas and just keep working his hair, and we will move on to his nose and the bridge of his nose as well. Continue to use your burnt ochres, your light umbers in these areas. This is a really dark area. Now, if you're not using the same paper, you might not get the same effect. I'm using the Pastel Mat again. And then obviously if you're using a different paper, you may have to rethink how you are blending and how you are layering things on top. Some papers take more layers, some papers take less layers. So you want to try to avoid getting some muddy layers in there. If you add too many on a paper that doesn't want to take more layers, you'll get a muddy effect, and it pretty much just turns it like a gray, sort of like an ugly brown gray, and you can't really go back from that. It's when the tooth of the paper is just kind of taken on as much pigment as it can, and it can't take any more. So if you do have a different type of paper that doesn't take as many layers as the Pastel Mat, you can use the tape method and try to pull some of the pigment off of your paper. Some papers do rip if you use too much tape, if you've used it too many times to pull it off. It is a really nice quick fix to pull up just a little bit of that pigment and then try to go over top of it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Use your judgment with the paper that you have. Right here I'm using the warm gray 70%, and I'm just laying down my base color, just getting that nice deep tone in there, and we will layer on top of it to make it look a little bit more round like we did on the other side, and continue to just blend these colors and make them how they need to be. Keep looking at your reference photo too. That is one of the most important things to stress, is just to keep looking at your shapes. Now when you have, I usually have a colored photo in front of me and a black and white photo, just so I can see the values in contrast with the color as well, because sometimes you can see different shapes in the black and white than you can in the color. And sometimes, you know, they change too when you're looking at both. They can differ greatly. But it is beneficial to have two different pictures there, the color and the black and white. So I stress to look at your reference photo, because sometimes, and I struggle with this, sometimes I get tunnel vision, sometimes I am so focused that my brain goes on autopilot and I just sort of start drawing stuff and not looking at my picture, and then I go back and look and I'm like, oh, that's not that shape, you know, that doesn't look like what I was drawing at all. And I realize that I'm not looking at my picture, I'm just kind of drawing. So I mean, if that's what you're going for, that's fine. But here I'm trying to get it as close to the reference photo as possible. So I want to make sure that I keep looking at my reference photo to make sure my shapes are proper, my values and tones are proper, and then my colors are also proper. So on top of this, I'm layering a little bit of black, and these are really light layers. You don't want to go in real heavy-handed, and I've said it before, this is a problem, that I struggle with. I'm a very heavy-handed artist. I really like to lay it on thick. But with colored pencil and the type of paper that colored pencil is used on, you really can't afford to lay it down super thick. Unless it's like a solid black or you're going for a solid color. But in nature, you have so many variations of color that it doesn't seem realistic when you are just throwing down a solid color. I mean, even in the eyes, when you're looking at the pupils, the pupils are black, but you have that shine, that glossiness over top of them. And a lot of times you'll find like grays and blues and, maybe a cream color in there. So it's not always just a solid color. A lot of times you'll add different colors in it to make it look more realistic. So I went over with my light umber in that area, and as you can see with the black and then the warm gray and with the light umber, it really has made it a really nice natural tone. So, and I'm going back through and just kind of adding some hair texture in here and blending it in with this dark spot by the eye. And you just want to keep continuing to look at your reference photo and keep blending all these little areas out until you are satisfied with the way that it looks. So for the majority of his nose, the bridge of his nose, and a lot of these areas, just like we did on top with the eyebrows, I am basing it out. I'm mapping it out with my peach color. And this is a really nice base for him because his fur is like a lot of different tones of brown. This is almost like a mutual, I guess, it shares mutually with all the other colors. Like you can add brown to it and, a darker brown versus lighter browns and some grays, and it kind of just blends it really nicely. So while you're doing this, while you're mapping it out, try to take note of the direction of the hair as well, because you don't want to do horizontal lines if your hair is going vertically, because what ends up happening is that you get like really streaky looks in there. Now, right here where I'm adding my French Gray 70, I'm doing little circles, and this is French Gray 50, and I'm doing the tiny little circles, just kind of making it look smooth. So if you want a smooth look, you want the little circles. If you're going for hair, go in the same direction as the hair is going. So with the light umber, I'm going in and over top of the peach, and I'm adding just a little bit of that to blend it to the hair that's above it and to make it look like it belongs, like we want it to all look, and work together. We want it to all be, of the same piece. And a lot of times when people are looking at your pictures, when other people are looking at your artwork, they can tell when, the direction of the hair is wrong. They might not know why they think it's wrong, but that's up to us to portray it the way that it should look, or the way that is correct. Sometimes that can be a bit of a challenge if you're not used to doing fur on noses. I find that the fur on the noses is probably the hardest part. if of doing like an animal, of having like, you know, a cat in this instance, you know, sometimes they get these crazy swirls on the sides of their nose, kind of where like the nostrils come up around to the sides of their nose. They get like almost like a hair swirl. And then too, when it comes together at the top, as you can see, the upper part in between his eyes, it's kind of like a part almost. There's like it's almost like they come together to like a point. So just watching that and being mindful of where the hairs are going and how they come together, how they separate. And of course, closer to the actual nose part, the hair gets shorter. Sometimes, you know, in dogs, there's a lot of skin on the top of their nose, like towards the snout, like the bridge of their nose. So you have to keep mindful of that too. Like, does the hair get so short that it turns to skin, almost like a bald, shiny, you know, skin part? But, you know, just really look at your reference photo that was provided, and you should be okay. Just keep looking. Now on his nose, he's got a lot of scarring. He's got, you know, a lot of hair changes and some deep scars. Some of them are a little bit black, some are white. You know, you can tell that they had grown back, and, you know, there was lighter colors, you know, in some areas. So I'm not really focusing right now on telling you what colors I'm using, just because we've kind of been through this. We're using all of the same colors as we did from the first tutorial up until now, the 5th, and we will continue to use the same colors to finish him. We're just kind of taking our time and going through and making his fur, you know, look really good. So here I'm almost using like a dotting motion. I don't want a lot of color here, this black. I'm just sort of creating a little bit more of a texture and just slowly adding some pigment in there. And of course I need to go back through and I'm going to darken up some of his scratches and his scars, but you need to add some depth here too if you haven't already. So I just touch of black in some of these areas, and sometimes I skip around because I get, like I said, I get tunnel vision, and you might too, and I have to almost change my eyes on a different shape, which is what I'm doing now. I'm coming over here and darkening this up because I started to lose my vision on what the shapes were on his nose. He's got a lot going on in his nose, so I'm coming over here and just kind of refreshing my eyes to the shapes that are in his nose. I'm going to continue under the eye and just darken the areas, sort of like a map. I'm just darkening some of the areas so that I don't lose these lines. And now I have my light peach. I'm just going in with the light peach and creating some of these hairs under his lower eyelid and just sort of getting it to the point to tie into the side of the nose. And get your light umber and start working some of those individual hairs out. Again, light pressure. We're not adding a whole lot of pressure. You don't want thick lines. You just want to add a little bit of color. And with your burnt ochre, go through and, you know, add a little bit more. Pull out some of those hairs. And then I'm going to darken up his lower lid a little bit. And I'm going to add, If you look at his lower lid, you can see like the individual hairs where they're going in at the lid. So like we did on the left, you can see he's got kind of a jagged edge. We're going to continue to sort of create that jagged edge on this side as well. You get your cream. Just a little bit of color there. And now that I have the cream and the peaches down, I'm going to lighten up like we did on the other side. And I want it a little bit brighter over here too. So I'm just kind of jumping around a little bit, but I'm realizing that this needs blended out a little bit more. And we'll continue to make these two sides look pretty much the same, or at least the same brightness, because he doesn't really have a shadowy face. And I'm just pulling out individual hairs again. Now, usually with white fur, his is a little bit different, but usually with white fur, it's not always completely white. So he has a lot brighter underneath the eyes, but I wanted to base it out in the peach and the grays prior to putting the white on top to give it more depth, more character. I want it to look, like it's natural. So naturally, we want to add more color. A lot of times with white, you find the grays and the peaches in that fur. I've done all white dogs, all white horses, and most of the time I'm working with French grays that have a little hint of brown in them, or, my warm grays, cool grays, and some black. So now I'm creating this jagged edge here with his eyelid and kind of separating some of these hairs. Once you add some of these darker tones, you start to see more of the individual hairs. It pulls them out a lot better. Some burnt ochre in here, just giving it some warmth. Blending out some of these solid colors. We don't want solid colors. Got my dark brown here. I'm just gonna keep this. I'm almost using like the almost polka dotting, putting just a little bit of texture right here. This is really short hair, so you're not going to see the strokes. You're almost going to see like, the specks of color, but it's not going to be solid, or you're not going to see the strokes. So it's a little bit different of a technique, I suppose, rather than just drawing straight lines for fur or direction, because these aren't too well defined. They're just sort of blocks of color. So blocking out again with my light peach, kind of going down the cheek just a little wee bit. And we're going to go up underneath the eye as well. And then we'll start on the nose. So being right-handed, I like to work from left to right and top to bottom because I want to reduce the amount, the probability of me smudging. Now, colored pencil isn't so bad. Now, if you were working with pastels, they're pretty easy to smudge. You get a lot of like flakes and, the dust that comes off of them, and sometimes it can ruin a picture. So thankfully, colored pencils and Prismacolors aren't that bad. Now, a lot of times if I do get some dust, I will take my soft paintbrush and I will either wipe it off, but I noticed with the pastel mat it doesn't work as well. It doesn't grab it. Like my paintbrush doesn't really want to grab it because it's so soft. So a lot of times I'll just like blow on my paper. Of course, you want to make sure that your mouth is not wet because you don't want to spit on your paper, but you just want to blow it off a little bit to make sure that there's not some extra dust there. If I were to get some black dust or something right where I'm doing the light peach, it might just turn it a gray color where I don't want it to be gray. Luckily with this paper though, it is really easy to draw light over top of the dark. This has a pretty unique tooth to it, so it does take an awful lot of layers. Okay, so let's start on the nose. We're going to start moving down the nose a little bit. And I'm really just mapping out, all the light fur. And we're going to put grays on top of it. And if you look at the reference photo, we're kind of do that fade and be mindful of all of his crazy scars that are he's just a beast. He must have got in a lot of fights. But it makes him unique, and they're really fun to recreate. So I'm just looking at my reference photo. I want to make sure that where I'm going with my peach, my light peach here, that I'm in the right spot. I don't want to color over areas that don't need this. So I just want to make sure. And this is where I start to almost get tunnel vision because, you're looking at the shapes, you're looking at the values and all of the pieces that make this one big piece come together. And sometimes it's really hard to focus. So that's why I just keep stopping and, starting again and trying to figure out where I'm at. Okay, so I'm coming back over here. I'm taking a break again from the nose. I got a few more pieces, but I wanted to come back over to the eye and start adding in some of my color. This is the light umber. So I just want to add over top of that area and just give it a little bit of color, touch of the umber, and then go back through. It's a pretty dark area over here. So I added my black, and now I'm going to continue with my dark umber, just like I had on the other side. The dark umber is one of my favorite colors. It's like such a rich brown, and it blends super well with the black and a lot of other colors, to be honest. Okay, so I'm just looking to see how dark I want to go. And I'm not using a whole lot of pressure, even though it is really dark over here. But I just want to add a couple layers, and then I will go back through and blend it together. And there is hair coming down, so I want to make sure that I portray this correctly. And back with the light umber, I'm blending it out with the darker area below. I don't want it to just be a dark shape with a light shape next to each other. So we want to make sure that this is a nice transition in between levels of his face. So we're just working through this and continuing to blend it, continuing to look at our reference photo, and just taking our time. Try not to rush. I know sometimes you feel like you need to rush because sometimes you might just feel like you're bored with it, or you might need to get up and take a break, and that's fine too. Now I'm going back through with my dark brown. Now the dark brown isn't as rich as the dark umber. It is sort of like just a true brown look. So I'm going back through just to blend out this shape of his fur, like where his cheekbone is. So there's a high spot here in the cheekbone, and then we want it to look like it is a smooth transition, like I said. So just keep working these shapes and working these colors in. And I'm almost using a flicking motion because the hair on his cheek and the side of his face is a little bit longer than it is on the nose and the side of the nose. So you will use that flicking motion like we did on the top of the head, but you're going in a downward motion rather than an upward motion like it is on top of his head. So I'm starting to do this dark area down here, and I need to darken it up over on the left. Sometimes I will find areas, if I start working on a spot and I feel like it's darker than, another area, I'll go back through and just deepen it just a little bit more until I'm satisfied. And I don't find anything wrong with that. If you as an artist, we have to be comfortable with what we put out as our artwork. So don't feel like you're failing or that you did it wrong or anything. If you feel like you need to go back, darken an area or lighten an area if you're in another spot. I've never felt bad for doing that, and I don't think you should either. Some artists can just go through, and just do it, and I'm not sure if maybe they edit it out or anything, but I don't, because honestly, we're looking at the whole picture. We want the final product to be good. We want it to sell. We want to create something beautiful, and it's okay to go back. So don't ever feel bad for going back through. And I'm still just working this black in here. I'm pulling out some additional hairs and darkening up underneath his eye. So working again with the black. Well, still, I guess I'm still just pulling out some of these individual hairs and blending this area. As you can see, we're starting to lose that shape of like the really bright, and the contrast with the really dark. So it's really starting to blend very well. I'm really satisfied with the way that this is looking. We don't want it to be a hard line. Again, this area is a bit shorter of fur, so I'm using shorter strokes. Some of the areas towards the nose still sort of like a polka dot, like a dotting motion. But in this area, I'm just focusing on pulling out some individual hairs, getting some more detail within that cheek. And then I want to lighten this area up a little bit. This is the French Gray 20, and I'm just pulling out a few hairs. I'm not going wild, not doing a lot of pressure, just pulling some out. So now I am finishing up with this French Gray 20%, and I'm going to move on to a Cool Gray 10. And I really, really like overlapping those two. I think that they work well together. So, you have the natural color with the French gray. It has a little bit more brown in it. And then this is so close to white that it really just pops it out. And we'll add, some other colors yet. But just pulling out some of these additional hairs over top of those, the layering just looks so good, especially in person. Now, when you're, photographing your artwork, a lot of times, if you're just using your phone, if you don't have a good camera, it'll get washed out. A lot of these colors get washed out. I noticed with my phone, the grays tend to really get washed out, and it seems to push a lot of the whites to the forefront. So you almost have to do a lot of messing around to set it up in natural lighting and try to make sure that your camera is set at a good setting, just to get, all of those fine details, because a lot of times in pictures, people can't see the details. So if you are photographing your artwork, it's a good idea to really study about how to do the lighting, how to set your camera and everything, so you can get all these beautiful details, because you really can't see them. I know when I post online, every time I do a picture and I post online, everybody loves it, but then when the owner comes to pick it up, they can't believe how different it looks and how much more detail there is. And they're just pleasantly surprised. So, sometimes our pictures can be, a downfall if we're trying to promote our work. And it doesn't mean you have to get a professional photographer to do your pictures. Just do your homework on what needs to happen. You don't need a super expensive camera either. I know a lot of people who have the phone cameras are just more updated phones, which phones are also expensive. But if you're using it anyway for your business, it might be a good idea to have a good camera on your phone to take pictures and, do your studies, to do the lighting, and just to get the best possible outcome of your pictures. So I think the cheek is pretty much blended to the point where I am satisfied. Of course, I can't say that for sure, because I might just jump back and forth later if I find a spot that I think needs fixed. Again, here adding some texture, just some little specks of black to give it more depth and to blend out some of these harder shapes under his eye. And just continuing to pull out some of these extra spots of hair, some darker spots. And it's really starting to look nice. It's not so harsh of a blend there. And I'm going to jump over to the other side and add a little bit more detail over here. I'm not satisfied with this area. The other side looks really good with texture, and I just want to blend this and make it match. Okay, and now with my French Gray 50, I'm going to add a little bit of color down here. And I'm just going to kind of close in on that nose and just start mapping out this area. We're almost ready to start more heavily on the nose. So I'm still using the same techniques. I'm basing out with the light peach and then going in with the light umber over top and blending them out. Now with my French Gray 50, I want to make it look like it blends in with his cheek. I don't want it to just be a light peach patch. I just want to blend this all together so that the shape doesn't look like a shape anymore. It just looks like a value. And I'm just checking my boundaries here. I want to make sure that where I'm starting is where I need to start. This is dark brown. Very lightly adding a little bit of color here. So I added some of the dark umber, and now I'm going back through with the light umber and basing out. Now I didn't want to base out with the peach up here because it is a darker area, and I wanted to base out with something that was a little bit darker. So here we are with a light umber basing out his cheek area. So here I'm using little circles. I'm not really going off with the direction of the hair. I'm just sort of adding a little bit of a block of color here, a little shape of color, and then I'm blending it out with my 50% French Gray into the light umber beside it. And here I am using the flicking motion of the hair. And going back over top of all those colors with my peach. So I want the dark to be, you know, on the base because he is darker here and some of these colors need to pop out a little bit better. So just keep working with these colors. I have my dark brown again and I'm blending out some of these areas so that they're not so harsh of a transition. Pulling out some individual hairs with my French Gray 20%. Almost making a shine here. I want to just pull out a few hairs here. So the hairs that I drew, now I'm going to go back through and I'm going to deepen around them, almost like drawing in between them, if that makes sense to you. That's kind of how I envision it, or I guess see it. So I'm just going back through and I'm kind of drawing in between them just to give them a little bit more depth, like they're popping out, like they're chunks of hair or that they're individual pieces, and almost darkening behind them, if that, you know, if you understand that. That's how I understand it. But just working these areas and making these pieces of hair pop out a little bit more. So because I did that over here, I wanted to go to the other side. It was a little bit too orange for me. So I'm going over and using still the same color that I was using over there, the French Gray 20%, and I'm going back through and just adding a few hairs here and there just to blend it out a little bit more, make it a little less orange. So let's work underneath this hair piece here, and we're just darkening this up. I want to give that hair the look that it's sticking out over top of his lower jaw, if that's the way to even say it, I don't know, but I want it to look like it's popping out, like three-dimensional. I don't want it to look like it's sticking to his face. So we're just basing out with this black, darkening it up a little bit. We're not using a lot of pressure. Again, keep looking at your reference photo too. So this area on the side of his nose is pretty dark. I mean, it kind of leads into the dark, the darkness around his nose. And this little area here is like that weird fold that goes up in. So we're just going to darken that area up. Just try to keep an eye on your shapes and where everything is. And we're going to also blend it in as well. So I'm still sort of mapping out some of these darker areas and getting them, solid down. I want to make sure that I don't lose these areas because I work with a lot of, chalk or pastel for my base because it kind of goes away. And then also it kind of stinks, I would say, because if you don't watch your hand, you can wipe it off. So I kind of like to map out before I lose them. So just keep going back through. I'm just kind of tweaking these little areas, adding a few more hairs with my cool gray here, and just pulling out some individual hairs. Go back through with my white and lightening up some of these hairs as well. Using the black again, going back through and adding a little bit more texture here with that short hair. Again, you're not really worried about the direction of the hair right here. You're just worried about the texture. So I'm just going through and adding small bits of little flecks of color. By now you're seeing that it's starting to look a lot better. Adding more depth with the black and the grays is really starting to make the hair over here look really good. So just keep tweaking if you see that it needs to, tweaked. If you want to modify some things, go for it. This is your picture and it's your work, so you can follow me all you want, but if you see something that you want to change, you should. So now this is my peach. I'm going in not a whole lot of pressure. I just want it to look different so I don't lose that shape. So, because I did the light peach on the other side. So, and now I'm going to the nose. I don't know why I did that, but I must have been bothering me. So I'm outlining the nose in some black. Not using a lot of pressure, just enough to give me some pigment on the paper. And I'm just wanting to make the outline here. So now that I mostly have this outlined, I want to go through the bottom of his nose. That is a really dark area, so I want to base it out in black. We'll be going over top of it with some warm gray 70% as well and blending it out. But I wanted to get his lips and his nose based out and mapped out with the black first. Now that I have the basic outline of the nose, I want to make sure that I don't lose that shape. I'm going to continue to darken these areas and just work on the dark parts of the nose. Now we're coming to a close on this video. It's only an hour long. So the next video we will start to blend all of the pretty colors within the nose to make it look like the picture. And then we will start to move up the bridge of the nose and finish that out in the next video. I have to apologize because these videos on YouTube are only about an hour long. YouTube keeps crashing when I go over a certain amount of time. I'm not sure why. I don't know if it's my internet or if it's on their end. But I have submitted some requests to try to fix the problem. So hopefully soon I can do longer videos on there and you won't have to go through several videos. But there should be about 8 of these videos, maybe even 9. It's unreal, but they're all very helpful. So I hope you enjoyed this and I hope to see you on part 6.